What are we going to talk about today? Well, let me tell you a little bit about me before I get into the vetting values and culture topic. I've retired about 10, 11 years ago. And so, I'm retired, but I haven't stopped working. And so I'm still pretty busy. And it's kind of interesting. What does retirement really mean? But I have featured an aid to job seekers with interviewing skills. And we do a lot of work in the job search, and then we get to the interview, and that's where the rubber meets the road. So that's why I focus on this particular part of career search. And the idea about learning in my services that I offer is, how do we sell ourselves? Because it's a selling presentation, right? And so I offer a free interview workshop. I had on 1 or 2 people at a time, and I'll tell you more about it at the end. It's on Zoom, and I'll let you know how to register and see if you're interested in participating in that. But that's a little bit about me, other than about 40 years in IT services, quite a range of responsibilities from developmental implementations, coding. If any of you can remember COBOL back in the 70s. But so I've done that all the way up to some major responsibilities. And I helped, I claim my thing here is helping Home Depot get on board. They had 2 stores when I implemented a system for them. And so their success is directly related to me. Nobody else knows that but me. So I'm the only one that takes credit for it. But anyway, I've done a lot of that. And so with that, of course, I've hired a lot of people, I've interviewed a lot of people, and I did one of these 25-year stints with a company, went through the layoff, did an interview, and miserably failed. And so I kind of did a deep dive into that. So we're going to talk today about a piece of that, the vetting, values, and culture part. So let's go into it. I contend that companies look for 3 things, and they're buying 3 things about us: our soft skills, our experience, and our hard skills, and the solutions to their problems and needs. Okay. And I've shortened that into what I claim to be who I am, what I do, and how I help. The very short is I am, I do, I help, as far as the model for selling ourselves in a job interview. And I also focus on differentiation from other candidates, because there's some things about that. There are a lot of things. If you've interviewed people, there's some common things that people say that are at best neutral and sometimes even negative. If a project manager says, I like to complete projects on time, under budget, and within scope. So yeah, so does every project manager. So how can we add to that? How can we differentiate ourselves with things like that? So that's the focus. And so today, which one of those 3 would you say is the most important? The I am, the I do, or the I help? Just unmute yourself. If you've put a parameter in to use your space bar, just jump in there and tell me.
I help.
I help.
I help.
Absolutely help.
Okay.
I think it's soft qualities.
Well, guess what? Do you go by Frederick?
Yes, please.
All right. You and I agree. I mean, I help is extremely important. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because a lot of interviews don't focus on the I help. There's a lot of I do's and a little bit of I am's. But why do you think that Frederick and I think that I am is the most important? Any suggestions or ideas? Or Frederick, why don't you tell us why it's important?
Well, because, they can find lots of people that know how to do what they're looking for, and they've got lots of people offering them solutions to their problems. The question is, do they like you? Do they trust you? Do they want to be on a 6-hour plane ride in coach class with you?
With a baby in the back seat. All right. And so that's the reason why. It's like, if, we could be fantastic. Now, I include the who we are with how we do what we do. So the I do is what we do, but the soft skill part of it includes the how we do those things. So it's not only our personality and our soft skills and our characteristics, but it's how we like to work. And so I would say that, gee whiz, if we can find a perfect job, we would find one that says it's a great culture fit. I enjoy going to work there, look forward to it. I can thrive in that type of environment. So that would be the most important to me. So the ideal position in job search, I put it into 4 categories, and I think these are the 4, is this the right job for me? Is this the right organization, the right company? That includes the values and the culture. I mean, is it the right product and services? Is it the kind of things that we produce that I enjoy being a part of? Our co-workers, our team members, and of course, our manager. Today, I would say that more people leave companies because of management than they do the company itself. There's a problem. I just had a friend of a friend whose son-in-law left a company. He's in banking. He's relatively high up in banking, got a good job. He left there and went into his manager and said, I'm leaving. And he says, why? I says, because you have never given us any recognition for anything we've done. You've always said, well, you can do better. And you've just come back and we just never get anything that's good. And the manager said, yeah, but if I don't do that, you won't try to do better. All right. Well, what kind of leadership is that? He left. All right. He's gone. And he's working for another bank, and he's got a good job. So things are moving on. But these are the things that really fit and say, man, if I can get all of these to match, that's what we call the dream job. So today's focus is really going to depend and look at, is the potential about this company match who we are and how we work? I want to just focus on that piece because of its importance. Of all the things in job search, there's tons of things we have to do. And then we get into the interviewing. There's lots of things we have to do in the interview. And then one of those things in the interview is to help vet values and culture. Plus, we want to do that with research and with informational interviewing, that sort of thing, to find out about that. Why don't we find out about a company before we interview them, at least when we can? Sometimes we don't have time frames, but there's nothing wrong with finding a target company, vetting it, saying, yep, this is the right kind of company. These are my top 20. I'll work 5 at a time, and these are the kind of companies I want to work for. So what are these values and culture stuff? Well, short definition, the beliefs, philosophies, principles that drive the business. And yes, you're going to get a copy of these slides. In fact, you must get a copy because I'm not going to go over everything that I'm giving you in this handout. But yes, you'll get a copy. And then the culture includes the values. So you've got shared attitudes, values, goals, and practices. All right. And values, I think, are the centerpiece of the culture. They drive the culture. If that doesn't match, there's something wrong. It says these are our values, but we're not practicing them. We're not doing them. We're not driven by them. So values are a subset of the culture. And you can talk about what is corporate culture. And there's a lot of different ways of describing it. There's values in the middle, but you can describe it as the way we do things, the personality of people, what people say about you when you leave the room, you know, the unwritten code. I remember when I worked for a company called EDS. Some of you may remember that. It was a Ross Perot company, and it's been bought and sold a couple of times. It's now something else in NTT Data, but there was several unwritten codes in the company. You had to have a sense of urgency. Deadlines were sacred. There was no protocol for communication. Just go to the person who has the information. No, several things like that. It's not written. It's not shown on the website. Of course, when I worked there, we didn't have websites for that. But nonetheless, those kind of things are the way we work, and it's kind of unwritten and established. But does it follow the values of the company? If we say that people are our most important assets, then I would be interested to see just exactly what they do to prove to me that people are their most important assets. So interesting statistics, 50% CEOs and CFOs. Now you're part of this group, and you tell me or agree or disagree that corporate culture influences these items: the productivity, creativity, profitability, the value, growth, all that stuff. This is what Forbes said. Would you agree with that? You think that's a valid percentage? Anybody disagree? I guess not. 88% of employees believe a strong company culture. Well, it's kind of interesting. I would think that 50% is a low number. I wouldn't think, why don't all of them say that corporate culture influences that? It's pretty interesting. That number is 50%. And there's more employees that believe it than the leadership and the executive level. Well, that's a very interesting statistic. But a strong company culture is one of the key to successes. And so I'm not going to read all these to you, but you can see that values and culture have a large and wide impact on the company, what the effects and what happens as a result of that. When I first started working with EDS, that was back in the 70s, tons of people were trying to get into the company. Everybody wanted to get into the company. It was very attractive. Or if some of them were older, even they wanted their sons or daughters to work there. Oh, well, you work at EDS? Well, I know somebody, they would like to work. I mean, it was very, very positive, very, very attractive for people to come to work there. And we grew pretty large. I had about 3,000 people there when I started, and we had like 118,000 when I left 25 years later. So many different things are an impact, and that's how critical this is. And that's one of the reasons that I'm saying we ought to pay attention to this, because of the impact and the criticality of the match. Well, there's three types of culture that I thought that's out there as I look around. One is the ones we want to be. Now, startups, medium-sized companies, smaller companies, they're trying to establish a culture. Going back to EDS, Ross Perot, supposedly in his little trip to Hawaii, got out his yellow pad and said, what does my company look like? And he put down the policies, he put down the principles, he put down, he basically defined the culture of the company before he even started the company. The posted is just exactly that, unverified by looking at what's on the webpage. It says, okay, I hear what you say you're doing, and I hear what you've got, but let me validate all that. And so I want to find out the way things that really work. How is it actually practiced? That's what we're going to focus on today, the way things really work. I need some help. What's wrong with some of these statistics? I need some help. 38% of the U.S. employees want a job aligns with interest and passions. What's wrong with that statistic?
Boy, that's a low number.
Should be 100%.
100, yeah.
Yeah, why only 38%? Okay. Now, I know that there's always exceptions to everything. People like to eat, and they will take jobs because they need something now. But I'm always telling them, well, find a job that you can learn something and progress in something to help you get to job A later. But nonetheless, yeah, that's a very low number. 47% of active job seekers said that company culture is their driving reason for looking for work.
Is that for people who are currently working?
It includes, yeah, active, but it includes both active job seekers. And there's a lot of companies that have people that are looking for jobs while they're employed. The unemployment rate doesn't show you how many job seekers are out there. It's far from it. It's probably double that. They don't count a lot of things. And one of them is people that are employed looking for another job.
I think it's too low.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's too low.
By driving reason, does it mean the primary one or first?
Yeah, a highly influential reason, put it that way.
Okay. Among the high ones, yes. Not the first.
%, cite company culture as their driving reason for looking for work. I think culture is an important factor for that. But I would say if I'm an active job seeker and 47% is that culture, then perhaps we can look at it and say, while that's a heavy influence on it, you can't just leave this as the primary reason for looking. It's certainly an influential factor. I am willing to agree with those who say it's too low. I can see that perspective and I can understand that perspective. But at the same time, when you fill it in with the whole thing, in fact, the next time I give this presentation, I might just change it back to too low. But basically, it's the result of their current choice. They should not be working in a job and then looking to move because they chose the wrong culture to begin with. So that's kind of my reasoning for being too high, is if you look at it for the working class, the employed side of things, if they want to change corporate culture, why didn't they figure that out before they got a job there? Now, things change and things happen, but nonetheless, that's kind of one of my reasonings. 35% they would pass on the perfect job if the culture wasn't a good fit.
That's surprising. That means they're unwilling to compromise at all, I guess.
The guy, there's more weight on the perfect, on the culture than the perfect job. It's got to be balance in there. You can't have one without the other. It's got to be
Yeah.
balanced.
Thinking bird in hand is better.
Exactly. How can it be the perfect job if the culture wasn't a good fit?
Right.
Too low. If the company culture is not a good fit, remember we said more that even the other aspects don't really count as much. But why is that?
What's the source for that data?
Well, here's my reasoning. If I have found the perfect job and I've gone through the interview process and all of that, and then I find out the company culture wasn't a good fit, I said, why don't you wait to find that out at the end?
Part of their culture.
I don't want you to pass on the perfect job. I want you to find the perfect job and go after it rather than get this job and then say, culture's not a fit. It's kind of like you wait too late. Kind of some weird reasoning, but that's an idea to talk about. 15% of job seekers turn down a job offer because of the company's culture.
Yeah, it's too low.
Too low. They're not discriminating enough. Too high.
If nothing else, I'd like you to kind of stop and think about it, because initially some of these percentages are like, well, that's too high. I would like nobody turning down a job offer because of company's culture. Why? And it's the same reasoning I just gave. If you're at the point of a job offer and you see that the company's culture is not right, think of all the time, energy, and everything you've spent going through the hiring process, all the work you've done, all that stuff, just to find out that when you get the offer, you say, no, I'm not going to do it. I would rather you not do it and not even interview the company than I would to interview and go all the way to the job offer and then turn it down. So that's kind of my philosophy about that. And we could discuss these from different perspectives and points of view, but it's kind of interesting to kind of look at these numbers and say, what's really going on and what's happening here? So they should have known sooner. And what happens?
So can I ask, irrespective of the source of the stats, how current are they? Are they in today's environment? Because we are in a somewhat unprecedented environment right now.
That's a good question. The data that I got, and I cited where I got these, some of these numbers can change rapidly. In the last 2 years, things have changed. I don't have the actual date. I might have it. I would say it's probably a year old. All right. I mean, I looked this up. I've done these numbers within the last 6 or 8 months. But again, I don't know that if all the data that's reflecting the change that's going on as rapidly as it is with any number that you see.
I have a question for you. Have this changed dramatically since the pandemic in the stats?
Oh, that's a good question. I haven't researched those numbers. I can't tell you the answer to that. But I do not know of anything that's not been affected by COVID. And in the job search too. So when you go look at salary ranges, I don't know if they're the most current. I don't know if the statistics of people actually looking for work are the most current. I can't answer that question. I wish I could tell you. But what would you think? Let's go back 5 years. All right. And think of what these statistics might be and put yourself in the role of filling out this survey. What would
I
you think?
personally think culture would be a big difference post-pandemic than it would be, simply because of the problems of trying to hire people, whether they're in the office, outside the office, other accommodations that are being done with people.
Right.
I think it would be a lot that the culture would be much more important now than it would be 5 years ago. Maybe it depends on what part of the country. I'm in the New Jersey tri-state area, where the pandemic hit pretty bad. I know it hit all around the country, but in our area, a number of people were hit really, really badly. So I don't know. That's just my opinion.
Someone that speaks in adverbs. I like that. I would agree with you. There's some statistics that are coming out. Is it Kevin McGinnis that's on Shark Tank? He's saying that 55% of employees that have been remotely working are not coming back to work. They're staying remote. And that's a really different statistic for sure. Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, Walt, this is Ernie Russell, a fellow EDS alum. The thing that gets to me is I'm going to say that the cultural component really came in, particularly for the senior executive in accounting and finance, when the private equity and VC world really opened up. It's hard to buy companies, put their culture of what have you done for me lately, like as in 30 seconds ago. That is where I believe the culture has really had a component. Where you have companies now, and I own an executive search firm, where people who are coming back and saying, hey, I want to have a company that's going to give me work-life balance. It matters to me to be home, be with my daughter for her recital, the son for the ball game.
Right.
Be with my family more than 3 days a week. We both work for EDS, what Travis is. And but we were also working in a great culture. And that's what I'm seeing right now. So I'm going to say it goes back pre-COVID, back to the private equity world.
Right.
Where you knew someone worked for private equity because they could take their shirt off and show you the whip marks and the scars on their back.
It's also interesting to look at M&A and how that's working in the past and how that's working today. I know that a lot of my experience has been, because we acquired a few companies, we had one person that left EDS 3 times and we bought his company 3 times and he came back to work for us 3 times. But the culture clash and the M&As are very, very difficult today. And while it all looks good on paper, now years ago, I don't know what it is now, but like 50% of mergers and acquisitions did not work because of culture. They did not take into effect that. General Motors bought EDS. 35 years of service, average years of service in General Motors. 35 years old, average age of an EDS employee. I cannot think of a Harvard business case where you couldn't put 2 different cultures at different ends of the spectrum together and how that worked. And that's why they bought Ross out. I was going to tell Ross, take his $720 million, listen to me, and I can make him a rich man. But those things are really different today. And we have different culture now by age groups. And so some of these things we got, I don't even know what I am, because I'm not a war baby. Yeah, I'm a war baby. So anyway, it's like we've got all these differences going on. And so as we try to satisfy the marketplace, it's like, well, you got to do this for the 20s to 30s and this for the 30s to 40s and, and so on. And those are different cultures. They like different cultures. So very interesting. We could talk about that for a long time.
I thought they sold EDS because of Ross. And the influence he was trying to put on there, but that was just an editorial comment from one of the divisions.
EDS was bought of an outsourcing, and we always said, gee, if we'd have gone to the top 5 companies, on the Fortune 500 list, and we could have made a sale to GM. So they outsourced to us, but they wanted to own us, to outsource us. The reason they bought us, we sold back, was their pension fund. They could not fund the pension because, the pensions for General Motors employees, and once they retired, is huge. I mean, it's big. Gave them lots of different things. And so, but they bought Ross out because of the contention between Ross. I mean, when Ross said, well, I don't know why it takes 5 years to build a car, it only takes 4 years to win the war, and things like that came up, side stories. All right, so we know that if it's not a fit, we're probably going to leave for whatever, and lots of different effects and things happen because of that. So here's a dozen things. Here's your survey question. So answer all these questions for yourself. What are your core values? What's your purpose, abilities, experience? Oh, here's a dozen of them to say, let me define me. Let me define me first to understand, well, if I can't tell you much about me, how can I build a target? So the first step in job search that I believe is to know ourselves, to look at ourselves and see what is it? What is it about us? How do we like to work? What does it look like? What's the values? What do I like to practice? What do I like to work? All those kind of questions. What motivates me? What are my strengths? What are my interests? Where do I have the passion? What kind of environment do I really thrive in? So one of the first steps is just look at our strengths. And so you can look at, and there's a whole bunch of lists of strengths out there. I went through and looked at these and I said, I think I'm about, let's see, there's 140. I think I satisfied about 65 of them. And so that was my self-assessment. But I think if I were to ask people to describe me, they would not come up with 65 different things. But nonetheless, it's just an example of something you might want to look at. I like the idea of having other people describe me and say, how would you describe me? And that's your coworkers and your previous management team or whatever, because that's our work personality. I contend we have a few personalities. We have our home, we have our work, we have our church, and we have our driving personality. If they're all the same, we're pretty well balanced, but sometimes those are kind of different. But prioritize those strengths. And no, if you have a strength, let's look at the strength and how does that play into culture and values. So an analytical person. The question is, does the company value data and analytics? That's one of their things that they look at. They think that's very important. I have a strength in doing that. I'm an analytical person. That's one of my values, is being strong in that. And that lends to the culture. How many assessments out there? How many have you taken over the years? And all of them kind of, they don't all measure the same thing, but there's many, many things, and probably a lot of us have taken them. So I'm just going to hit a couple. I like the social styles. This is for the salespeople. And all of these things in strengths is to help us better communicate effectively with other people. We'd like to know what theirs are and what ours are, how that matches, and how we can be better at work and be more productive. But you can have I remember talking to a couple of these people, and the analytical person, he came out analytical, and he says, I'm not analytical, and I can give you 3 reasons why. You know, when everybody fell out of their chairs because he's just as analytical as he can. I do the workshop, and yesterday I interviewed a data analytics person, senior person. And at the end of each workshop, I said, how valuable was your time today on a scale of 1 to 10? I just want to, get a little measurement. And he said, I don't know. I haven't analyzed the data yet. So I said, yep, you're definitely an analytical person. All right. Do any of you use Clifton Strengths? It's pretty popular these days.
I did.
Okay. So here's mine. I guess one word of caution about that. Now, Clifton Strengths is not a personality test. It's a very different kind of test. And it's kind of interesting because some of the terms that they use in their 54 set of strengths are not obvious as to what they mean, like input for data. And I always think about, I'm an arranger. So that's 3 options you have. 1 is I'm a Texas lawman. 2 is I work for a flower shop. And 3 is I'm good at organizing and putting things together for success. All right. So what do those mean? So if you use those, just listing them out is not sufficient. Sometimes we've got to talk about what they mean and the value of them as well. All right, so let's take some common strengths and see what we can do to say, all right, what about this can we learn? What can help us on our decision as to what ours are? So I took these 10 out of doing some research. And interestingly enough, it says, here's what communication is. Here's the definition of it. And then here's what you do with that. So some of it's a little bit of I do, and some of it's a little bit of I am. So if I'm good at communicating, I can do these things. So there's some I do's in there to make sure that that's how the I am fires and matches the I do. If I am this, these are the things I do, I'm good at. And time management. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these, but I'm going to tell you it's in the handout. And that's one of the reasons I would like you to get the handout, because I'm not going to just read all these things up to you. But I did these 10 strengths, did some research on them, and put 5s to each of them. Another way we can look at it is career path. So let's tell you, here's my career path. And I did not put finance in there. Now, finance is an interesting path because they don't teach finance, manufacturing, finance, retail, finance, healthcare. We're finance, all right? I had a stint. I have an MBA, and I had a stint in FP&A for about 3 years. I'm very financially focused in all my activities. I'm thinking about the profit and the bottom line and costs, all that sort of thing. But let's look at some of these things, and maybe if we're in one of these types of roles, and you can do it for finance as well, what are the skills? So I'll put a table together. And so if you're in customer service, these kinds of things are probably what you want to say, where do I fit into that? So if you have this kind of role, here's a suggested list, and then you compare that to yourself. So it's just to help you understand yourself. I'm not going to go through all of those. Now, Harvard Business Review put out a survey, or came out with a white paper of some kind, and said there's 8 types of company cultures. And they put them all down, they explained them. So it has the purpose, the caring, order, safety, authority, results. I know that EDS focused very highly on results when I worked there. If you want to look at authority, join the Army. That's a nice authoritarian culture for you. And then learning, so there's these different types. Then they say, okay, well, there's the way people interact and how people respond to change, or a couple of other dimensions. So everything's got to be in the 4 quadrants, right? Got to have 4 quadrants with everything. So they put together these 4 quadrants to say, well, here's how people interact and how people have interdependence. So on the left is independence, and on the right is interdependence. And so they came up with all that. All right, so what's the good with that? The thing that I did with that was I said, okay, let's take these cultures and let's ask ourselves these questions. How are the employees united? What about, how would you describe the employees? What do the leadership do in this type of company, in this type of culture? What's it good for? I always ask, that's the I help. So we got this great purpose and everything, but what's it good for? And then I have an example company so that you can look up and see a little bit about the culture of that. So you can kind of go across the top and say, all right, if I prefer this type of culture, you have to look at the definitions and then come across it. All right. And for us in the financial world, we are looking at, finance is finance, right? But it's not the same in every company. And we're looking more about what that company does, how it does it, what I can do. A lot of people say sales is the most important organization in the company. And we financial people say, unless it's profitable, if it isn't profitable, it's not the most important. And finance people, we can tell them where we've been, where we are, and where we're headed. That's very, very valuable for us. That's our value that we can bring. Now, there's some popular company values. So I picked 10 of these: teamwork, customer, goes with respect, integrity. Some of these might match you. Say, yep, this is kind of like, this is what I want to see. And I said, all right, well, what can we do with these? Well, I went out and said, let's just take an example of a couple of countries. I've got some a slide with the links of where I found some of this data, some of my research. So some of it's research and some of it's me. What I pulled up, and this place, this particular website has, I think it's 190 companies listed. And they went out to websites and they said, and I'm going to describe the culture for these companies. That was kind of interesting. So if you're interested in working for Coca-Cola, you might go look and see what it says about that. It kind of consolidates some of these things, and that's kind of nice to look at. from a searching for a company perspective. But let's pick Google and Zappos as an example. So here's Google. Take a look at these. Does any of them bring up a question you might want to ask for more information about?
Well, it's clear they don't do the right thing.
Anybody know what democracy on the web means? I don't know.
I would guess equal access.
It's a guess, right? But that would be a
Yeah.
good one. You might want to say, I saw these things because I'm very interested in your democracy on the web. Can you tell me more about that? All right. And that's kind of where we're headed here. But let's compare this culture with Zappos. And I don't know how many of you know Zappos. A lot of women probably know them because they're in the shoe business, and men just go by our regular business shoes, and women are all over the map. But what are theirs? And look at the difference between the two companies. Fun, weirdness, adventurous, pursue growth and learning, positive team, family oriented, do more with less. Now, what company doesn't want to do more with less? So I've been in sales as well, selling IT services. And I remember, once a year we get together and we spend 4 hours congratulating everybody on doing everything and meeting quotas and doing well. And then we spend another day and a half figuring out how we're going to do it for the next year. The question is that what questions might we ask to vet company culture? That's the whole meat of this. I'm giving us some help on helping us define ourselves, what we're looking like. We have the target defined, all right? So now we want to find out if the working culture is the same in an organization. So we want to ask some questions. Two primary ways is job interview and informational interview. There's a third not talking way, which is just company research. Now, remember, that's the posted value. That's not necessarily what the actual working culture is. But if you go to Amazon, they have several testimonials of employees that work there that tell you what it's like to work there. Very positive thing. Toyota, go look at their website. In fact, in almost both of those, you have to scroll down through a lot of stuff before you even get to the part where it says punch on this for careers. And they're telling you, this is what our company's like. And if we don't, is that a match? We ought to go apply, all right? But if it's not, and if you don't have that, and if you don't know, Amazon's 16 leadership principles and how to apply them, which one's the most important in this role, you're going to have trouble. So how do I go about doing this? And this is what I suggest we do. We build a table called the company values table. We want to put 5 columns in it. The value, the definition of it, what good about it? So what? What's the value of the value? How is it demonstrated? And then we can develop questions to ask. So let's take one, for example, teamwork and collaboration. So what does definition of that mean? It's process 2 or more people working together to complete a task, okay? And I inserted shared out of the dictionary because if it's not shared, it's not that. And teamwork and collaboration are really 2 different things. All right, so here's the value. It drives growth, it's handling sudden changes. So there's multiple things that say, oh, here's the good about it. So when I'm in an interview and I'm talking about my collaboration, I can talk about when we collaborate, we can achieve these kinds of things. For example, here's how we handle this sudden change. For example, here's we reduce stress in the environment. Here's that. And we can talk about it because we know the value of that particular topic. So let me keep going forward instead of backward. How does that demonstrated? Well, what do they do? Do you see flexible approaches? Do you see clear member roles and what they're supposed to do? Can we find the relevant information easily? Are we equally successful? Is the team rewarded as a team? Or do you get individual rewards? So we got several of those. Then, okay, knowing that, here's some questions I can ask. So how would you describe, well, I keep hitting this button, sorry. How would you describe how the team works together? How do other departments communicate with each other and view? How do you describe the relationship up, down, across? What happens if a team member falls behind in their work? What do you do? How do you handle that? So we want to come up with some questions that we can ask, because we've got lots of questions we want to ask, but these are specifically designed for the culture and the values. How we can ask questions. And we want to have multiple questions so that we interview multiple people, we can ask a different question to see how that works. Some departments, larger organizations have multiple cultures within the organization, different areas do have a different culture. So I've got about 10 of these. I'm not going to go through all of them, and that's why I want to give you the handout, but I've done a lot of homework for you and what this means. And so if any of these are your value, here's how you can go about taking a look and getting a start on that. Now, if it's not listed, then you're going to have to fill out the table yourself, right? And in leadership, by the way, I put 3 subtables, and the questions are about the same, but here's transformational, transactional, and autocratic, democratic. Let's give an example. Who can give me the definition of work-life balance?
Will depend differently for each person.
Of course.
No, it
What
depends
do
on
we-
what. Okay.
Well, all right, so here's a definition. A balance of work and life depending upon the individual in terms of how much time they want to work and how much they want to spend on the rest of their life.
Okay. Sounds pretty good to me. Generically, it's the division of time, work and non-work, right? And you're right. It depends on you as an individual as to what you like. I was accused of being a workaholic, and I saw it as surviving. It was a tough job for a while. I used to work 90 hours a week for multiple years, very, very difficult. But when I got my performance review, they said, "Well, you just do it all. I don't know how you do it all." I said, "Well, it's very simple. It's 2 jobs. I just, do two 9 hours worth a week in accomplishing all of that." All right. What's the value of work-life balance? What can we come up with that?
Well, I mean, to be cute, you could say it's really priceless, and the value really depends on the individual. And
What would it mean to you? Y'all just think about it for a moment. Y'all's a Texas term. But think about it for a moment. Say, how does that help me do better at work?
Well, I think it helps you focus mentally because you're refreshed or less stressed, or perhaps appreciate your job and your home life a little bit more.
Okay, that's pretty good. I mean, it's kind of like avoiding burnout. It's a good way to do that. So here's some reasons why we have less stress. We actually have higher productivity and lower absenteeism. We don't get burned out. We've got improved physical and mental health. All right. And there's a higher commitment, motivation to work. But it's very interesting. Now, I only have heard of one company, and it was Toyota. One person told me, he said, they really believe in work-life balance. And I said, how do you know that? I said, they came and told me after I've been working there 30 days that I was working too long, go home. And have you ever heard of a company do that? But that's the working value. So Toyota is very serious about work-life balance. It doesn't help that they have a lot of money too. It doesn't hurt. How was that demonstrated in the workplace?
looking at, I mean, you see it by the flexibility in hours,
Right.
right? You also see it by, your management and tone at the top, how they approach, you having to run out for errands, or, what your day looks like.
Okay.
All right, leading by example, too, to extend on that.
I should have used you for resources for this information. Do they offer telecommuting? Do they have gym memberships? What's their vacation? What's the work hours? Leaders examples, you just mentioned that. Do they have the right priorities? Are we focused on the right things? Or we spend a lot of time on the, I call it majoring in the minors rather than focusing on the important things. All right. And what questions might we ask either in an informational interview or in a hiring interview to determine if they have a work-life balance?
Do you have a hybrid work schedule?
Okay.
Do you have a lot of morning or late evening meetings?
Okay.
You can ask them about their benefits. I mean, it may not be directly related to work-life balance, but the portfolio of benefits that they offer you may be indicative of how they look at work-life balance.
Okay, I have two comments on that. I agree with you. I also say, let's don't bring up benefits until the offer. It's just kind of risky, but you're right. All right. And so you're right on track with this. What's a typical work week look like? I see the job description has 40% travel. Would you define 40% travel? Oh, well, you're going to spend 5 months in Asia and the other, the other months here in the US, or is that 3 days a week? Or is it, what does it mean? 2 weeks out of the month? How does that fit? Because I might be able to take a couple of days a week very easily, but being out of the country for 5 months is, I won't be able to handle that with family and whatever it might be. One person, some of you may know Jeff Morris. I know a couple of you do. Chris, you probably know Jeff. Has son, and he was interviewing for a job, and he asked his manager, said, when was the last time you've taken a vacation? And he says, well, I haven't taken a vacation since I've been here, and he's been there 3 years. And what does that tell you? And the job descriptions, little red flags, must be able to work in a fast-paced environment. Okay, there's a signal there, a lot of stuff going on what's happening. So it kind of says, well, what's fast-paced and what's causing it to be a fast-paced, those kind of signals. But anyway, this is the whole idea about here's the value, here's the definition of it, here's the value of it, how is it demonstrated, and then with that information, I can ask questions. So when do we ask these questions? Well, if it's an informational interview, we get to ask them. You got a lot of questions to ask, and this is a tiny portion of the questions on the culture and the values, but I would say we should put them up front in our priorities to really say, if this doesn't match, I kind of treat it like the recruiter asking, telling us, what's your salary requirements or what were you making your last job? It's a knockout question. If we can't get past this, we're done, right? Same type of mindset here. Let's make sure this is the right culture up front before we get too far into this process, either through our research or in our initial interviews. And sometimes, we get calls, we get a question, and different people call us. And I call those screenings, not interviews. I call them screenings, and they're looking to see if, yeah, you can do the job, those type of calls. Sometimes we can't even ask questions to those people. All right, and during the interview, there's generally a opening statement question. Tell me about yourself, what brings you here, why'd you like to work here, those kind of things. And so there's a chance for an opening statement, and we can tell that. And I pay strict attention to that in the interview success workshop that I did. But at the end of that, there's the question we can ask, and I think it's pretty important. And I used to ask 2 questions, but just within the last 24 hours, I said, maybe I'll risk a double question. I usually refrain from asking 2 questions at once. The reason is the second question doesn't get answered, and I don't like reminding them they didn't answer the second question. So what are the top 3 characteristics for the top candidate, and how would you measure success in this role? You can make 2 questions out of that. You don't want to ask them consecutively. But the idea is we're in sales. How do we find out what they're buying? Well, we look at a job description, and we can't depend on those. All of you have had job descriptions that certainly don't fully, describe your job, right? You do a ton of things, a lot of different things, a lot of tyranny of the urgent, got to do this, got a lot of ad hoc reporting, a lot of things going on that. But if I can find out who you're looking for and how would you measure success, what can I achieve for you? And so it's a finding out the I am and the how I can help you. Everybody in sales starts out most of the time with how can I help you? Sorry about that. And we want to do the same thing in the interview. So all I'm saying is let's include some culture into that initial questions as well as some of the other things. But I'd really like to know what I can do for you. How can I help you? And I'd also like to know who. And then we're going to see if it's a match, right? And then we can start discussing those things with the response. Now,
Hey, Walt,
yeah,
this is Ernie Russell. I've been getting some feedback from some attendees. They're kind of asking if you could take a breath every now and then. And I'm sorry, I worked for people in Plano for a long time, and I know how you folks go. But they're just asking that you slow down a little bit and just take a breath every now and then.
okay, I'll talk Texan.
Bless your heart.
I generally talk faster for the northern communities because they talk faster than I do in Texas. But thank you for the feedback. I can certainly do that. I know that's why I'm giving you the handout too. All right. So you can go back through this, and I'm not going to just list everything in there, but yes. All right. So during the interview, there's a particular topic that comes up. And they'll say, maybe describe how you dealt with a difficult team member. So I respond to that. I hope I have a story to tell them about that, because stories are so strong, and people remember stories. They don't remember the data. And that's another thing to get off into stories and star stories and stuff. Well, I might come back and ask a question. If, and it's an if, and it's a pretty high probability if, that they are telegraphing a need by their question. Why are they asking this question? There's three things to consider on all questions that they ask of us. Who's asking? What's the question? And why now? All right. Where are we? Am I in the process? Is this a knockout question up front? Is it a question for discussion in the middle? Is it, if somebody asks a salary question to me on one end, it could be a knockout question. On the other end, they're looking to make an offer and they want to know some numbers because they want to prepare an offer for us. So it can be very different. But the thing is, make it conversational in an interview. It's much better than an interrogation. The good news is that at your level, most interviews are conversational. You don't have a problem getting into a conversation about things. And that's one of the benefits and bonuses at the executive level, is that most interviews are very conversational about things. And then if they ask for questions at the end, they give us time to ask questions. The comment that I make is, if it's true at the end of the interview, it's too late. We can't save up our questions for the end. We want to talk about it during the process. Having your prioritized list of questions. They have a list of questions to determine if they want to hire us. We have a list of questions to determine if we want to work there. We have to prioritize them because we probably won't get through all of our list. I suggest a starter list at least of 10 questions. All right. And your objective is to see how many of those you can use during the interview. At the end of the interview, it's not a time. Now, one of the options at the end of the interview is to say, well, how much time do we have? If they're looking at their watch and saying, do you have any questions? I mean, it's over. They're not going, we can't get into a discussion to talk about anything. But there's always a couple of questions we want to ask in the close. I'm not going over the close here today, but we do have some definite questions at the end. All right, here's your action items. What are your top 3 strengths? What are your top 3 values? What are your top 3 culture characteristics? Have you written them down? Have you studied? Can you answer that question? Can you tell it to me? Can you articulate it? Can you articulate it easily? Can you be brief in how you articulate that? Then you've got some things that are in the handout that may give you partial answers to that, but suppose you have a value that's not listed in the handout. So what we're going to do is we're going to do some research to determine the definition, the value, what it looks like, and then we're going to develop questions. In other words, we're going to make an entry into our values and culture table. And then prepare your prioritized questions list to include the value and culture questions for job interviews and informational interviews. Since they are so important, I think they should be near the top of the list. So we don't, you don't need to go too far if things are out of whack. So that's my suggestion. That's your homework. How can you do this? Well, a lot of this I found, and I went out and I did some searches. And, you know, there's a ton of stuff on the internet. And this Chat GPT, which has some concerns, you can ask Chat GPT to go out and do a lot of research for you. And a lot of Chat GPT is, it does our research for us. And as with anything else, there's everything we look at on the internet, that doesn't mean it's valid. We have to validate everything. So it's not necessarily the truth. But I will tell you this, Chat GPT will make things up. And we have to be careful in using that. But nonetheless, what is your value? What is this definition? If we understand the definition, we are able to talk about it easier in an informational interview or job interview. And what's it good for? What's the value of it? I would love to sell not only my strength, but the value of my strength. So I'm selling I am and I help. What are your strengths? Well, I'm very responsible. You know, amongst my strengths of attention to detail, focus on the customer and profitability, I'm able to turn customers around, increase revenue by meeting sales quotas, etc. You know, I give the value added to the strength. That drives it home, and it's a very, very strong differentiator. And then develop those questions. All right. I've done some research out there, and some of this, I'm just giving you the links where I found there's more information that I necessarily supplied. You can find tons more information that I selected here in some of this information that I got. But here's some areas that you might want to go look at. So if you want to go look at 190 examples of company values, there's 190 companies out there. One of them may be your target. And that'll help you get started with that. And of course, if you ask, well, what are the 10 most popular values, you can get 51 lists telling you what the top 10 are. And generally, they're not the same. But that's you can do with that. So with that in mind, before I take any questions, let me finish up by talking about the interview success workshop that I do. And for you that are in the different learning styles, I really push the kinesthetic learning, learn by doing and interviewing. How do we prepare for an interview? How do we practice? Practicing is going to help us gain confidence and understanding. And the workshop is free. It's very, very informal. It is a learning workshop. It's learning how to sell. It covers 12 basic categories of questions. And it talks about strategies, structures, options, approaches. Like I said, there's always an option of how you might answer a question depending on those three factors. But you look me up on LinkedIn if you're interested in taking the workshop. I give it on Tuesdays, 9 to 11 Central Time. It's online, it's on Zoom. And basically, I'd like a resume just to give me your background. I don't really pay a whole lot of attention to it other than knowing you. And then the job description, which I pay a lot of attention to, as to are we answering questions relevant to the job. It could be a sample job description of the type of job you're looking for. It doesn't have to be a real one or whatever. And the idea is to have fun, have a good time by learning, learning how to sell and differentiate. There's also in the Dallas area, now we're doing a lot of that online, is the Dallas Pit Crew, the practice interview team. That meets at a church on the first and third Wednesdays, online on the other on Wednesdays at 1 o'clock Central. And the 1 o'clock online session may have a live interview for a person who agrees to have observers with their interview, or it will show a video of something that's done on interviewing. It's easily, you can reach it. It's all online, Zoom. You can look it up. So if you don't know about a website called careerdfw.org, I advise you to go look at it. It's a huge resource for job seekers, tons of information and work out there. And Jeff Morris, who has, he's the founder and he's the keeper of that particular website. has recorded a lot of videos from presenters over since COVID, and he's got probably over 400 recordings out there. Mark McDonald used to lead the pit crew, and when COVID came along, Jeff asked him and I to put together some presentations. We came up with 13 presentations about interviewing, specific parts of it. We had to be bigger than a 12-step program because job search is harder than recovery. But nonetheless, those are pretty valuable if you want to look at them, and go to the Career USA YouTube channel. That's Career USA/YouTube. And there's a plethora of areas of job search topics. There's LinkedIn topics, there's networking topics, there's resume topics, there's interviewing topics, and a lot of resources out there. And those 13 sessions we did are all recorded. And if you like, I'll drop a link in there that'll go out and show you what the 13 sessions are and give you links to them as well. So I suggest that we practice. If you would like to participate in the workshop, this QR code starts an email to me, to my Yahoo email address. I need your phone number and how you learned about the workshop and on what date. And I require almost the same thing if you want to link with me on LinkedIn. I am not a lion. I do not respond to generic LinkedIn requests. A simple note, if I saw you on, met you on, heard about you through, or whatever it might be, will get you a connection. I practice differentiation because I sell differentiation. So that's what I do with that. All right, questions? And that's that QR code. Did I talk any slower?
Yeah.
You
So-
did great. You did great. Walt.
From a interviewing perspective, how often is the interview process different in terms of the people you're working with, sort of like the front office versus the back office? Like if you're going through the interview process, you get treated a little bit differently or better, and that you might get the wrong impression about the culture based on what people are saying. When you get into the trenches, it's much different, and you feel sort of that you didn't pick up on whatever the clues were or stuff to that effect. Is there a generalized way to make sure that you hit all the right notes in order to make sure you get the culture identified?
Okay, before I answer that question, does anyone else out there have suggestions or what they have done about that?
What I would do is I would go back and I'd interview a current or preferably a former employee.
Yeah, I think one of the questions we can ask, if we don't think we've got enough coverage by our interviewers, to ask, would it be possible for me to speak to a team member or a couple of the team members? Would it be possible to speak to your manager? Would it be, we ask if we can talk. If your things are going really well, says, can we take a tour? And you can say hello to some of the people out there. Say, how long you been working here? What do you like about the company? There's approaches that you can do to see if you can't cover your bases. And that's through the interview. Does that help?
Yeah, it kind of was in line with what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, one thing that we always talk about is the FENG is how the FENG by design is a support group for financial executives, CFOs, controllers, and directors. And when you're out here networking with each other, your FENG brothers and sisters, you have a great resource, and we have ways to access our database. So you can go back to those current or former employees and really start asking those in-depth questions. And hopefully, again, through the spirit of the FENG, get an honest and forthright answer.
Jeff Morris has his own job seeker group, career search type meeting on Fridays. And he records those. He'll bring in guest speakers sometimes. But to all the participants, they can put down in the chat the title of the job they're looking for, the name of the companies they're seeking for target companies, companies they can help with, and put that information, and he sends that information out to everybody. And he also has an Excel spreadsheet with about 10 years of people who have attended, and for those who have landed and told him where they landed, he's got one that says, here's where all these people were. And if nothing else, you can go look at that and say, oh, well, here's Walt, he did this. And I say, Walt, I attended Jeff's group, and I see you attended it. You know, we got a common connection and something like that, just to get started simply with that alone. So certainly within FANG, you've got a tremendous resource. You got a resource across the country. You got, you know, you're across the nation here of potential resources that can help you. And it might be somebody in California that knows a lot, somebody that's working in Philadelphia, you know, and that works at a company there. It can be all over the place. Yeah, I really am strongly a believer in networking. I believe don't send a resume to a company without an invitation to send it. Do your networking piece, find out. I'm dating a person now in Dallas that if you want to know somebody in Dallas, call me, because she knows everybody. She's 72 years old and she's been here all of her life. Her grandson played basketball with Dak Prescott at the gym. I mean, it's just all over the place. And if she doesn't know her, then her daughter does. Tons of people. So it's everywhere.
Walt, Leora asked me to ask this question because she is unable to. The question is, I thought that millennials, Gen Y, was a much larger generation than baby boomers. So how is it they say that there's a worker shortage, especially of younger baby boomers, especially if younger baby boomers are still working, including Gen X and oldest Gen Zs? If there's such a worker shortage, why is it still more difficult for older workers to get hired?
It's one of the mysteries of the universe. I mean, it's a very tough question to answer on why that is, and there's so much going on. But it's like, why, now that COVID is essentially over, where are all the workers? Why can't we get a decent cook in a restaurant? Why can't we get a server? Why can't, you know, the trades are very, very hard. We need truck drivers. I mean, all the trades. In fact, today, don't go to college, learn a trade, learn a service, because there's going to be a lot of engineers put out of work. I mean, technology is taking over so many things, but I don't really know the answer to your question. I haven't done research on percentages and that sort of thing, but I have heard a lot of things about the different things that the companies are looking for. Now, I am a pre-baby boomer. I think there's probably a name for that. I don't know what it is, but you know, age is good for smaller, medium-sized companies because of the experience that you have, and you know what the things that you can do, and the many hats that you can wear. Not as effective in the larger companies. So I went through 3 layoffs with EDS, downsizing. Guess who was most people left in those downsizing? The higher salaried people, right? It didn't matter whether you could do a good job or not. You know, we're saving money, so we're going to cut, you know, these costs. So I don't know why it is. It's a mystery to me with the job. There are jobs available that people are not taking. And what are they doing? What are the 20 to 30-year-olds doing out there? I mean, I don't understand. I'm going down the highway and I'm looking, where are all these people going? Aren't they working? They should be working.
They're travel bloggers.
Huh?
They're travel bloggers.
Yeah. I wish I could answer that question.
Walt, I got to tell you though, I went to two large state schools here in Pennsylvania, and we're having our people, for the most part, coming out of the College of Business with a job opportunity in their hand. And we have some that have a job opportunity, they turn it down and take a better job opportunity by the time September rolls around. And so as far as that goes, the one thing that I am seeing is focus. Companies are almost becoming myopic on what they need. I need someone, it's like a baseball team. I need a left-handed pitcher who can throw a curveball, but also mix it up with a slider and a fastball, that's going to be coming over 100 miles an hour. There's only a handful of those people out there. And that's what I'm getting out of it. But as far as trying to go back and trying to find the right place to be, that's what it comes down to. I have a son right now in the communications industry. He's a international newscaster and a journalist. And he only has 5 places he can work. And that's a challenge. And if you're not their pigment of skin, their gender, they want to find ratio balances, and it's difficult for you to find a job. And that's the way it is. But the thing that I'm seeing right now is particularly people in, I'll say 40 plus, it's trying to find some place that they like and some place that the employer also fits in. It's a cultural fit, but also a geographic fit. And that's what I'm seeing really as a major constraints that are going on.
Yeah, a lot of people, COVID has changed the world, and it's certainly changed the job market. It's certainly changed the way we work. And as Kevin was saying, 55% of, he owns what, 54 companies. He says 55% of the employees remotely, they refuse to come to office. They're not coming back.
Think about the multiplier effect that has in a metropolitan area. When you sit back and take these big, huge buildings that they built in the last 20, 30 years, they have an infrastructure now around that with businesses. People's livelihoods are based upon those businesses, fast food, restaurants, even the cobbler. When there's nobody coming through those turnstiles on the train station, it's tough. And it's the multiplier effect of this whole thing working remotely. It took me 20 minutes longer to come home this evening. Not because I went the wrong way, not because of traffic jam, but because Thursday is a new Friday. People are not working on Fridays.
We're adopting the medical profession standards.
That was Tuesday's the golf day, wasn't it?
Yeah, Tuesday and Fridays, I think.
Is the majority, everybody's working remote when they're working? Or if they
Yeah.
Before we finish, I put a couple things in the chat window for you. One is the handout for you to download. And I talked about these 13 sessions about interviewing. And if you go to that link, it tells you the topic and describes the topic, and it also gives a link so you can look at those. And those are around an hour or so video. Some of them have about a 20, 30-minute introduction to the session. You have to find it a little bit later, but for example, if you want to learn about video interviewing, how to do it online, how to look good on TV. So one of the sessions about that. One's just on asking questions. One's on star stories. One's on opening. One's on dealing with recruiters, avoiding crashes. How do you make a connection and build rapport online, et cetera. So it deals with those types of topics if you're interested in finding out about any of those specifics. And that's just a bonus.
Walt, that's just great. Really appreciate it, Walt. Again, as I say, as an executive recruiter, I prepare my individuals by going back and doing just like what you've laid out here. And there are these things online as well, but I'm really interested understanding your culture, understanding your passion. I'm really looking forward to going through those YouTube presentations about preparing for the interview. And of course, the various types of interview, which is totally different.
The biggest differentiator in an interview is your attitude and your energy and interest in the job in the company. It starts with your greeting and it goes through. So when you tell a story, how you tell the story is more important than the content of the story.
And also the open-ended question, tell me about yourself. And how to answer that intelligently. And that's something, again, Walt, you're going to agree, I hope, that takes preparation and preparation and knowledge. Knowledge on how to answer that question. And of course, being prepared in answering that question. but the STAR situation you keep on mentioning, could you just explain to the rest of the group what STAR is?
STAR is a behavioral event interviewing response methodology. Behavioral event interviewing came about back in the 70s, I think, got more popular. Some companies adopt this as their interviewing style. And the questions start with, tell me about a time when, or give me an example of. And the suggested response methodology is the situation, the task, the action, and the result. Brevity, let them ask more questions. Start with brevity. They used to say 2 minutes max. I'm down to 90 seconds, sometimes 60 seconds today, particularly if you're online. Time is longer online than it is in person. When you hear somebody talking, it doesn't take long to lose interest. When I was a interview success, a customer success manager working for an IT company, I had a CIO of one of the colleges and universities that I made a proposal to accuse me of bait and switch. That is the situation in the task. It's all in one sentence. I can tell one sentence on each one of those, and that's helped us with brevity. So what I did was, well, the first thing I did was I notified my chain of command all the way to the president of the company, because this person had copied everybody in the executive area of the university on his email. So I said, be prepared. You might get a call from the president of this university coming to our president. The second thing I did was I informed my management that I was working on a response, and I would have my manager and his manager review the response. The third thing I did is I waited a day because I was so mad and I was angry because they accused me of this, and I couldn't believe it. And it upset me hugely. I mean, how can you survive doing business like that? So I had to wait so that I could come back. So then I drafted a response as to how I did it. The basic element of the response was, I'm going to ignore what went on to cause this. I'm just going to say, if I've misled you, I apologize. I'm going to take the responsibility. What really happened? I think he threw me under the bus. I think he did something, because it's very clear in my community. I could defend it to the death. Say, here's the proposal. You selected this. I sent you this, contract, and now you're sending this back to me. So no, that's not the approach. And the approach was, I would rather be right. I would rather be right or effective. And so I choose effective. And so I thought it was more effective to do this. Then I would say, as a result of doing that, we had a meeting together. I did not discuss how we got there. I said, if things were going haywire, we want to stop that right now. What can we do in the future to prohibit this kind of thing from happening in the future? And so after that discussion, which was face-to-face, we ended up signing a contract, and I brought in about $150,000 of a contract for an add-on service for the university. So that's a short STAR story. The question, and the reason STAR stories are so valuable is everybody loves stories. Their attention goes up. They listen better. If you are interviewing somebody, which do you remember most? You remember the stories they tell than all the rest of it, all right? The examples. In that story, I'm selling, I am, I do, I help. I led a team through collaboration, whatever it might be. Here's the people that I involved in the team, whatever. And it shows how I process. It shows, here's what's important. Here's how I do it. Here's the steps that I took to it. And then as a result, this happens. And many people just totally leave out the result. I can't tell you the number of people says, we all got together and figured it out and everything came out okay. I mean, that's their story. Is that enough or too much?
No, that's perfect. But the thing that I like about the question is usually that question is highlighting an issue that they have, and you also want to end that result with a positive, value-added contribution to the bottom line that happens. And we all know as people who call us a cost center, we can contribute to the bottom line by mitigating expenses and mitigating risk. And if you're controller, CFO, director in accounting and finance, that is probably the pressure that you want to be pushing right there.
Well, in finance, we need to have numbers, all right? We need to have numbers, and we can have percentages, but we either increase revenue or decrease expenses. Everything we do falls into those categories in the financial world. And those results are going to be important. So I've done that here. And then it's great to follow that up with a question to get more information about what's going on and what's happening. Okay. You can also include at the end of that, and what I learned from that experience was, if that was a learning, you know, was something that was significant there through that process. So it really makes a difference. People identify with the storyteller.
Right. Frederick, I think, Walt, excuse me, I think Frederick had a question. You weren't? Nope, you're just scratching. Okay, good. Just trying to make sure we cut everybody up.
One of the video tips is avoid touching your face.
I was going to say that video tip was to make sure that you have everything in front of you underneath the camera, which of course is your
eye
cheat
level,
sheet. Everything's at eye level, but everything else that you have.
background,
Yep.
no distractions. Yep.
It works well.
Well, we're kind of over time. I don't mind staying longer for those who want to stay if you want to talk longer.
Are there any other questions for Walt?
Yeah. Well, I know we had a little snafu on the link this time, so I'm glad that you were able to join. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. I do a few other presentations as well. One is the top 10 things we do to differentiate ourselves, for example. That's got another title to it, but it's something like that. I do the vetting. I do video interviewing. I do a few other presentations. If Joyce would, she knows the topics that I do, and she can help if with the groups of saying, you know, choosing any that you might want to hear about. I welcome any feedback that you have. Let me ask you this question: was tonight worthwhile?
Yes. Yes.
Chris, are you eating pizza?
No, I'm not eating pizza. Definitely helpful.
And I'm the one who has to apologize for the snafu. Something happened with Zoom. I set the account up, did everything I should have, and luckily Joyce called me about 20 minutes after the hour and said, you know, WDF, what's going on? And I unfortunately was coming home, and I'm so thankful for a good teammate like Joyce to step up and to not only put out the fire, but to rebuild the bridge. So Joyce, I know you're there. Thank you. And I can't say that enough to Joyce as well as her boss. So it works out well. Walt, I absolutely enjoyed being with you, having you with us. I was at EDS from 95 to 98, post Ross Perot, but I was there in the financial executive, no, excuse me, in the, we were processing loans up in Wayne, Pennsylvania. And we were acquired by EDS and Consumer Asset Management Division. So I was the one putting together the packages for the public issuing of securitized portfolios, and I had to have all those documents about the founding, and Ross and his wife and everything else went with it. But it was a great culture. The other thing which I heard about EDS, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, you were an employee for life if you went overseas representing EDS. True?
I haven't heard that. Doesn't mean it's not true.
Yeah. I also was at I was also at a sailboat regatta. I'm a former judge for U.S. Sailing. And somebody made a comment. That guy on the other boat, he was with EDS. And I forget the last name that began with a P. He was the one who orchestrated the Wings of Eagles and the return of the EDS employees.
Okay, that was Colonel Bull. The colonel, you're talking about the colonel that led that?
Yes, but he was an EDS employee from what I was from
Well, there were about
Tipperelli or
13
something like that, or
there's about 13 or 14 people that helped
Gotcha.
rescue those two people out of Iran. And the book is on Wings of Eagles, and I have everybody's signature on that book, and I know every one of those people,
wow.
back in that time. But that speaks to the core values of EDS. The State Department wouldn't do anything, so Ross did it himself.